Fab, thank you, Sue. So MSc Computer Science is an initiative that was brought by within Cities and Georges. We have a number of different schools or faculties. The one we work with is called the School of Science and Technology. So this is maths, computer science, and engineering. And the idea for the STEM Digital Academy was started by the school. And it is a master's program that is 100% online and 100% asynchronous. So those are already two really big sort of tasks to take on. And then to add additional complexity, but to make it more flexible and accessible for students, students can start the program 365 days a year. So we don't have specific cohorts or intakes where you have to wait for a particular date. You can literally, one student can start on January 1st, another student can start on April 12th. Like, it's up to the student. They all can start at different times if they want to. Matt, do you want to tell us a little bit more about the variety in the program?
Yeah, so what's quite special about this program is that there is a core sort of pathway called the MSc in computer science, but you can also sort of specialize with specialities. So as you can see from the slide, there's MSc computer science with software engineering, MSc computer science with data analytics, with cybersecurity, and also with artificial intelligence. And basically, the way that it works that is that if you want to specialize into a particular type of pathway, there's like a series of core modules you have to do, but then you can also do sort of specialism modules. And basically, when you take them and the sort of specialisms that you take determines what degree you come up with at the end.
And these are the current pathways. There are plans to potentially extend them, but at the minute that means 18 modules, each of which, well, the whole point of the 365 thing is that you can flexibly do them at your own pace. So if you want to go through kind of quote unquote full time, it's 8 blocks of content, but you can, of course, do them faster or slower. That's the whole point of the flexible design. So how does this actually work to create all of these modules, to have them not just created, but then live to students in this flexible way? We have obviously a team of academics. So that's Dr. Laura Silvers, who's the Deputy Director of STEMDA, who line manages and works with 6 lecturers, who all have a variety of specialisms within computer science, and who are full-time working on this program and project. There's then us, the lead team. So we're all educational technologists with various specialties within that. And then, of course, we have the course officer team, and we have 3 course officers who 2 of whom primarily work on this program, like pretty much entirely work on this program. How this all actually works, though, is that we all talk to each other all the time. So this is not a project where we meet once a month. This is a project where we are constantly in communication with all of us. I could probably even add more arrows onto that slide, but that would make it hard to read, so I tried not to. But the 3 of us, Matt, Daniel, and myself, we are in pretty much constant communication, whether or not we're on campus, who's editing which video, who's updating this on the VLE, what are we waiting on from this lecturer. We're also in direct contact with the lecturers as needed. I literally got a query from one about 20 minutes ago about how our referencing policy meets our accessibility policy, so that obviously students can have the correct information about sources, but in ways that don't mess up anything else accessibly around our systems. Similarly, Matt, I mean, how many emails, Matt, today have you had from our academics? Like 4? And it's 2 o'clock?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, something like that. So we're all in constant communication to make this work. It's not a program where it's kind of like, this is your baby, go off and come back to us when it's all over. It's constantly a team effort. So why then is lead involved? Why are there 3 of us educational technologists in that complicated picture? We were involved in this project mainly to provide project management. So obviously 6 academics, 18 modules. That's a lot of stuff to keep track of. Each of those modules has video lectures where students learn material. So a standard module of 8 blocks has 56 videos, all of which have to be 10 to 15 minutes, minimum 10, maximum 15. So that's a lot of videos. That's a lot of things to keep track of. That's a lot of things to produce, as we're going to discuss. So the project management side is a significant part of what we do. As I mentioned, accessibility also is as well. So in some ways from a strict digital accessibility point of view, so WCAG standards, PS bar, that kind of thing, but also bigger picture things like VLE consistency, accessibility in terms of explicit communication about how to access different file formats, for example. And then production consistency, to make sure that that massive, massive number of videos and slides all are maintained at the same very high standard, regardless of scale. So those are the three pieces that we're going to talk to you a little bit more about in terms of what we do on the EdTech side, and then of course take any questions you might have. So I'll talk first about the project management bit. So there's a lot of spreadsheets. That's how we keep track of everything. So every module has a spreadsheet. We are constantly checking the slides we get from lectures. We are checking and editing the videos we get from lectures. We are checking, we have a massive, massive checklist that only gets bigger in terms of building the VLE to ensure that every module is consistent with every other module. We spend a lot of time with checklists, with spreadsheets, with checking in with everyone, with closely coordinating between myself as project manager, with Laura as the leader on the academic side to make sure that all the different pieces are kind of on track at the same time. Obviously, modules aren't developed at the same pace. So, kind of making sure we always know where everyone's at and supporting everyone as needed. This obviously spreadsheets are great, shared spreadsheets. We can all, say I'm on leave, right? Matt can go in and access and knows exactly what's going on. Um, it is also tricky to make sure everyone kind of knows how everything works and that the processes are always transparent as well as being kept clear. But really, what this means is lots of Teams notifications. That's essentially how we make all of this make sense. And that's why there is project management for this program. Obviously, accessibility is important to us as well. Matt, maybe you can tell us more about this?
Yeah, so basically for this program, we wanted to ensure that it was like accessible both in the design, just so that the design of the materials is accessible so that we don't have to do lots of remediation. And also we just wanted to make sure that accessibility was at the center of everything. So the way that we have done that is that in the design of like the slides, so we created basically a slide template, and then in the process of the design of the slide template, we made sure that sort of the colors and the different types of font sizes, etc., were all accessible. But predominantly, one of the main ways that we tend to focus on accessibility is through the use of our accessibility sort of checklist. So we have basically for each slide, once the lecturer has completed a slide and sent them across to us, we basically have a kind of thorough checklist that basically goes through things like is the text not overlapping in the area that the captions will be when the video is there? Is the text large enough? Is the text and materials like the right size? Also, we also focus on like other things such as ensuring that each of the images within the slides has like thorough and like good alt text. So rather than just writing like, oh, this is code, we have to make sure that each individual image of a sort of code editor has all the particular types of code written into the actual image. So that's quite a thorough job to do, as we have to ensure that, yeah, basically that all of the stuff is there. Um, Yes, mandatory explained and enforcing. Yeah, and one of the essential parts of all of this is that like this accessibility is mandatory as the slide says. So there's a lot of sort of back and forth between us and like the academics where we sort of check the slides, and then we'll be like, look, there's these issues. Are you able to rectify them? And sometimes we'll actually do it ourselves. So yeah, it just means that basically we get by the time that everything is sort of produced um and completed, we basically don't have any issues with accessibility. Oh, and yeah, of course, this part here is that we on Canvas we offer the slides in both PowerPoint formats and also PDF formats. And we do try and make sure that all of our content and every that is shared with learners is accessible in a variety of different ways.
And we also explain this to students. So
Mm,
before the files,
exactly.
there's
Yeah.
literally a sentence that says, we are providing this in two separate formats. The content is the same. Use the PDF for these reasons. Consider using the slides for these reasons. So we don't just provide them, we also make sure that you don't end up with students in a panic going, wait, why are there two different files? I need to know the difference. We want to avoid problems in that way as well.
Exactly.
The third piece is the production quality, because all of the accessibility things make no difference if the videos are really hard to watch. So, Daniel, how do we do that?
Cool, cool, cool. Everyone can hear me, I hope. Yeah, so we work in the studio, and it's kind of like it's called the Rapid Mook, right? And it's kind of like an all-in-one studio recording system. So the middle kind of Plymouth box thing you see, which is blue, that's kind of like the all-in-one kind of recording system. It's got like a camera built into it, it's got like a touch screen and screen control, and that's where like the program like kind of runs. Everything in the rest of the studio you have like four spotlights, you have a green screen, you have a Wacom tablet which is like a touch screen and also has like a mirrored screen from what's shown on the Rapid Mook main Plymouth thing, and that kind of all kind of allows you to kind of make these recordings in a very simple kind of way. So when a tutor kind of enters the studio, it's almost like a one touch or very kind of, yeah, almost like one touch kind of solution where it's kind of you turn it on, it automatically boots up into the Rapid program, and then they can kind of very quickly kind of get set up, have the background keyed out, and have like pretty consistent audio, pretty consistent lighting, and access to stuff like the teleprompter, yeah, and like and their slides very easily. I think the main point about the Rapid MOOC and this whole setup is that it's kind of the ease of use. So my job when a tutor comes into the studio or for a recording, I'll spend a day with them explaining how it works, how to change window sizes or do various different things. And they'll only take about a day, maybe two. Then I'll be like on hand in the next room to kind of help if they have any problems. But basically, after about a day, 2 days, they're completely, fine to get on with it on their own, which is great because then they can sort of go in there on their own anytime, do the recording, and once they've done their recording and you've got like a bunch of videos sorted, me and Matt as well, can go in, collect the footage, and then kind of edit it using Premiere. So it's very, I'm sorry. Ooh, okay, sorry. Thought I heard something. Ignore me. So yeah, so it's like the edit because it's such a simple process, it means that we can spend a lot more time kind of editing, kind of getting the stuff out really, really quickly. Um and it takes away kind of like most of the technical issues that might arise from a more complicated system. That being said, okay, as much as I love my Rapid MOOC, right, it was completely not flawless, right? So there's times when I think in the early summer it literally just crashed, and they had to send some dude from France to come and like fix it and everything. Lovely guy. Their service was pretty good, to be honest. Like my guy got here from France to here to fix it faster than I could get to IT. I swear to God. But it was amazing. It was great. It's great. So that was kind of super helpful. It's also good that uh, it's also good that that it being not so kind of like not so complicated that if something does go wrong, it's pretty limited to either the software or some very basic hardware. So yeah, I think the issue the issues are quite minor, but the overall process of it and everything, the overall experience of it has been pretty consistent and pretty useful. So yeah, it's been a blast. I
So
think
that
that's
takes
it.
us through the 3 points of the main aspects of what we as edtechs do on this project. So we'd love to take any questions that might exist at this point. So I can see some in the chat. How many students take the program each year? So the program launched in May last year, and we're up to I think just over 250 students as of like 3 or 4 days ago. So it continues to grow. I think we got just over 200 right after Christmas. Now we're at 250, so it keeps going. And I believe we have, oh, I'm going to get this wrong. I think it's 7 of the modules currently have students on them because they do them one at a time. Um, But then, of course, we have modules that are like ready and waiting for the first student to be up for them. So on our side, it's sometimes a little hard to keep track which ones have students on them versus are just ready for students to be on them. But there's a whole bunch. Do we coach staff on how to deliver an exciting and concise delivery? Kind of. So we do two things. First off, they write their scripts and we see them before they record. So we can advise on things like, oh, that's a really long sentence. Or actually, hang on a second, this part doesn't maybe make sense if you're not already a specialist. You might need a bit of extra explanation. We did teach them all at the beginning things like, hello, welcome to this video session, and things sort of like that. And I know, Daniel, there's been a few times where you've gone in and kind of coached them literally in the studio with like physical body presentation as well when they've asked. So that is available. In terms of the accessibility
basically my
checklist.
thing was,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
like, please smile. When you're on camera, please smile. Don't fidget. That's it.
Yeah. So we've done things like that. Also, I remember right at the beginning when they each joined, Daniel, you did a check with them about where to put the microphone so that it doesn't like brush up against clothing or hair and things like that. Our accessibility checklist honestly is not that interesting because a lot of it is very, very specific to our slides. The fact that, for example, they're computer science. So a bunch of the things that we check for are accessibility from like a programming point of view. Like if you've got a bit of code, what do you do with it? It's not really applicable more broadly. So I guess what we'd say is use like the Microsoft Accessibility Checker for slides, and then think about kind of how students are going to experience your slides specifically and develop from there. So I think probably the only one that's deeply applicable is don't put text where the captions will be. That's applicable kind of no matter what. But the rest of the things on our checklist are like really niche and specific to like the particular textbook we're using for a module or something like that. So probably not that interesting. Is assessment automated? So it's, as I said, split up into 8 blocks. So at the end of each block, there's a formative quiz, which is a quiz. So yes, by definition, that part is automated. There's a mid-module assessment. That's a much, much more complicated quiz that after a lot of front-loading work does then become automated. The final assignment is usually like a project or a report or a piece of code or a demo video or something like that, depending on the module. So that part is not, the marking is not automated. Let's see. Some of these we can't answer. So obviously as edtechs, we were not involved in the approval process for this module from the academic module program spec side. That is not what we were involved in as edtechs, so I don't know the answer to that question. How frequently is the video content updated without having to re-record the whole thing? That's a good question. Matt, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to take that one. Well, so we tend so we have we kind of, how do I explain this? So we basically upload once the video's been done, we then upload it to like Kaltura Media Space, and then that's then hosted on is then embedded into Canvas. Because we're kind of only really within the sort of first year also of the master's program, we haven't really had to do any sort of significant large recreations or changes of material. However, we do frequently have things that where lecturers will be like, oh look, I've made an error in this slide on this video. Can you change this? So what we tend to then have to do is then download the video, or download the video from where we keep it in our sort of hard drive, or within Teams actually, and then we then have to sort of edit it on Premiere Pro, which can sometimes be quite difficult because if you've already got a pre-recorded video and then you're trying to stitch something over the top, but sometimes it can be as just easy as just putting an image over top of a video. We have had also, because City recently has joined with St. George's, we have had to also change basically like 3 aspects of like every single slide of the of all of our videos, which was not amazing, but once again it was just basically kind of stitching things over the top of one another. But we haven't really had to do anything significant in terms of like redesign of materials, though I feel like that might be the part of the next part of the project. We are also exploring ways of automating like the process for like small edits if we have to do that. So using sort of AI, but yeah.
But essentially, it goes back to the point we made earlier of like the way that those sorts of things happen is all through communication. So we've taught the academics the how to explain what's needed to us in like the clearest possible way, so we don't have to send 15 emails back and forth to figure out what the change is. And then because myself, Matt, and Daniel, this is primarily our project. This is the project we're mainly focused on, and so we can make those changes pretty quickly. But that's how we do that. The question: does your team get involved in the program
Miranda,
module?
I'm
Sorry.
aware we're pretty much at time for the start
Okay.
of the next session. If City St George's colleagues are willing to stay on and start answering some of those questions in the chat,
Yeah, we can do that.
That would be really really appreciated. And thank you, colleagues, for putting the questions in. That's great. If any don't get covered, we can certainly catch up afterwards. But aware that we're probably at time now. So thank you, thank you very much. If colleagues want to show their appreciations, I think only via reactions. So yeah, there we go. We've got some claps coming up. So thanks, Miranda. Thanks, colleagues. Really appreciate that. Alex, I think you're next.
It is me next. Yeah. Thank you so much for that presentation. That was a fantastic way to kick us all off there. And it's really great to see some questions being asked in the chat as well. Can I just check that my screen's coming through as it should do?
Yeah, we can see that.
Thank you, Sue. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Alex Beers. I'm the e-learning content development manager at King's College London. And for the next 15-20 minutes, I'm afraid you're going to have to listen to something that's a little bit self-indulgent. So please don't shout at me or throw things at your screen. This is a presentation that's been percolating in the back of my mind for a wee while. And it's a very kind of reflective, looking back at kind of like where things were, and also kind of like looking forward to where things can or could be. So come with me on this wee journey over the next kind of like few minutes. And yeah, I'd love to kind of like get some of your feedback and comments towards the end. Okay, so the presentation is called Fail We May or Sail We Must, and it's reflections on navigating using social media in higher education. And let's just talk about kind of like what that phrase is. So as many of you know, Andrew Weatherall is a DJ and a musician, kind of like whose musical career spanned kind of like the early 90s up until his untimely death in 2020. And one of the kind of the key driving things that helped him move forward and explore kind of like new and untapped areas in kind of like a musical world was this phrase, fail we may and sail we must. And this phrase essentially means that things may be looking bleak, kind of like and a little bit problematic as we go forward, but we must push on. And for me, that really kind of resonated kind of like where the higher education system in the UK currently is in terms of learning technology, but more specifically, social media at the moment. Because let's face it, social media is a fairly rough sea that we're having to navigate for those that actually do that. So let me just take your mind back, way back. And some of you on this call are going to be kind of like far too young to even remember kind of like this period, I'm sure. Let's go back to 2009. And that was when I first joined kind of like the platform Twitter. And for me, it was an incredible revelation. It felt like I'd tapped into an endless sea of ideas, comments, connections. You know, it was this evolving digital commons where I could connect with many in my field. I was learning technologists at the time, but also educational developers and people at the cutting edge of higher education and educational technology all around the world. It was a really dynamic open space for sharing ideas, bringing together collaborations, and also kind of like establishing professional networks that have kind of stood with me kind of like up until this point. I considered kind of like my approach very early on in the Weller approach as an open educational practitioner and using kind of like Twitter for microblogging and sharing open educational resources. And this kind of like really aligned with my own values and approach in lowering barriers to access for information and sharing information and being as transparent and as open as we possibly can be within our roles. Okay. And that kind of like very fortunately allowed me to connect with researchers, journalists, technologists all around the world. This was just an interconnected space that allowed playful kind of like participation in lots of different networks all around the world. And that really kind of like helped kind of like me develop my professional profile and allowed me to connect with people kind of like in different universities and organizations around the world. And the early entry into that was spending some time in the Media Enhanced Learning Special Interest Group. All the hashtags are on this slide here. So feel free, if you still do use Twitter, to go and have a look at some of them. Some of them are very vibrant, such as LTHE Chat and Creative HE, and also the social media in higher education chat as well. But also kind of like some that are more kind of like relevant to kind of like this group that are on this talk here. So AltC and EdTech. These hashtags still emanate in Twitter and other spaces and do allow people to who have an interest in these areas to coalesce and communicate and converse about these things. And that's kind of like really influenced my professional practice and allowed me to kind of like develop really long-standing relationships over the years. However, we get to kind of like a stage where platforms that we've invested a lot of time, effort, and energy in no longer respond in the same ways that they previously have done. New features come in, old features drop off, new communities kind of come in, and older kind of like people move on to different platforms and different spaces. And that's just kind of like the nature of these things. The enshittification of Twitter, which will soon be known as X, basically kind of like allowed the platform to decay. And I've got a comment there from Wikipedia about what that actually means. Fast forward to 2022, which I think for many, this was a turning point for lots of people, certainly within kind of like educational technology and higher education and academic development. Basically, Elon Musk taking control over the platform and paying the princely sum of 44 billion for that privilege, basically changed the kind of the nature of that platform. And I know what kind of like some of you are saying. I think there was already kind of like problems in it beforehand. I don't think we can lay all of the blame. It has kind of like fate. Certainly Twitter hadn't been responding to issues with bots and misinformation for a number of years beforehand. But personally, kind of like my take on it was that I'd carved out a very kind of like clear way of allowing me to access information, hear the trustworthy voices, listen to kind of like the latest research, and find those spaces in amongst this, the kind of like the noise, if you like, in this space. However, this once vibrant digital landscape has now become a tempestuous sea of misinformation. And like many, you could no longer see your colleagues and your connections in this space. Actually, they were drowned out by kind of like lots of noise and conspiracy theories and anger and frustration. And that kind of like meant for many, myself included, spending a lot of time in this platform was no longer yielding the results that it previously had done. And sadly, kind of like the noise of Twitter that once was useful and positive really became silent, in that positive way, which is incredibly sad. And as you can see, kind of like from this slide here, we've got a few kind of like comparisons to draw. So as people were kind of like leaving Twitter, I don't want to call it X, I'll just call it Twitter. I hate saying X. People were moving to LinkedIn as a space, but also Mastodon. And then Meta came up with Threads, and Blue Sky kind of like came around the corner just recently as well. And so you can see from the numbers here, the mass of people kind of like are still kind of like using kind of Twitter and LinkedIn. While for many there is those connections, professional, but the conversation isn't necessarily as there as it used to be. Mastodon for me has kind of like problems of access, and Threads is very kind of like light on interaction. So what I'm proposing today is that Blue Sky is something that you should definitely try out. And let's have a look, kind of like, is this the new horizon? Is this a space where we as learning technologists, educational developers and academic practitioners, is this a space that we should be moving to? And I think at this point in 2025, it is the place that offers most hope for many of us who've been set adrift on these social media seas. Searching for kindred spirits and old friends, and kind of building on that presentation from last year that Sarah Sherman did. Where did everyone go? And it appears that kind of like many of us are actually in this space. And it's the place that I guess most reflects what we valued and appreciated from Twitter when it first started out. It allows us to kind of like have reasoned kind of like discussion and debate and communicate in a way that is less frenetic. It has to be said because there's less people in there. Currently, there's only about 33 million users compared to Twitter's 500 million. But that said, I think that kind of like means that there is an opportunity for us, and what many people have kind of like noticed, and I primarily cite Andy Tattersall at the University of Sheffield, is that there is an increasing movement of higher education institutions closing down their Twitter accounts, not all of them, but some of them, and moving towards Blue Sky and that new horizon, and thinking about kind of like a place that is less polarized and kind of like more social in its nature. And the hope is that you'll join me for those that aren't already there, but also kind of like the other kind of like people and spaces and institutions that are already there. And in particular, the scientific community, which has had an incredibly torrid time, I would say, in Twitter over the years, has kind of like moved over to Blue Sky wholesale. Okay. And so I'm kind of wrapping up here, but just to say that this is incredibly important, I guess, to me, and this is the I guess the reflective element of it. I think hope is important when it comes to technology. I think it's important to learn from the past and recognize kind of like that things change and that's fine. It's important to recognize that because we don't necessarily have the agency to control or own these spaces, it's important to be in spaces that we can help shape and fashion in positive ways. And I think currently Blue Sky is that space. And feel free to come back in 5 years' time and tell me I was actually talking nonsense. But for the moment, hope is important, and hope for me lives in Blue Sky. And so I hope that you will come and join me at some point in Blue Sky. And so thank you very much for listening. And I would love to hear your take on this. Any
Thanks,
comment,
Alex. I think
question?
there's a couple of questions that I picked out just as colleagues are perhaps writing others. The first from Honora. What's there to stop Blue Sky getting just as enshittified as Twitter?
Fabulous question, Honora. You're absolutely right. I think there is going to be challenges in terms of its growth. So we're currently, as we're saying, there's about 30 odd million people there. How did Twitter expand its growth? Well, it allowed advertisement in, product placement, and kind of like new features that were not necessarily focused towards the community, but rather to actually kind of like generate income for that. And I think, unfortunately, and again, shout out to Andy Tattersall for kind of like doing this work. There basically there is some challenges about creating the finances that are required for it to maintain this free and open space. So maybe we're looking at subscription models, and that's kind of like one of those issues that don't always necessarily, attract people. Not everyone wants to pay for these type of technologies. But yeah, any other kind of like comments or questions?
So there's a follow on there that is, do we think that other professional communities use these platforms in the same way as EdTech or even other EdTech people across the world? Are they using them the same as we are?
Yeah, that's a great kind of like shout. I think where you can see it most visibly is in the health kind of like communities. So the scientific and health communities, they definitely kind of like have stopped very much kind of like using X, Twitter as their kind of like main platform and have come into Blue Sky. So there's a lot more kind of like reasoned discussion and debate about health issues, which when posting on Twitter generated a lot of polarity and negativity.
And then one final one that I'm picking up, perhaps a more of a technical question. Are Blue Sky and Mastodon both distributed hosting, or is it just Mastodon? And do you know? I guess would be my first question.
That's great. I think I know, but don't quote me on this. I think they are kind of like they're not distributed in the same way, but in the sense that kind of like Mastodon, you have to kind of like know which server you want to kind of like join before you can sign up. There is a kind of like I can't remember exactly the term. There's less ownership in terms of kind of like who owns the kind of like the data. So there is that kind of like little bit of contrast between the two. Mastodon is federated. That's the word I was looking for. Yeah.
Nice, excellent. And then I'm picking up a few comments in the chat, but I can't see any specific questions. So thank you very much, Alex. Really appreciate it. And I think we're pretty much on time. Obviously, please do continue on in the chat with varying comments, but appreciate that. Shall we head into a break?
Let's head into a break. So we've got, let me just check my script here. We've got 5 minutes. Is that right? 10 minutes?
I think hopefully we've got 10. Hopefully people can come back
minutes,
just 5 minutes before 3 o'clock. I think that would be really useful.
So yeah, so thank you so much for kind of like the questions and comments in there. I thank you also for indulging me in that kind of like look back and look forward. Please go and get yourself a well-earned coffee and a biscuit, and we'll see you in 10 minutes time.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks all. Hopefully colleagues are on their way back to joining us. If people want to maybe put a thumbs up in, if you're back in the room with us, we'll kick off in a minute or so.
I shall share my screen.
Yeah, please do.
Thank you.
Okay.
Is my screen visible? So if I just minimize the small pop-up, so my entire screen will be visible. Is that fine?
Yeah, we can see that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, Mansa, are you ready?
Yeah, yes,
Okay, so hopefully everyone has had the biscuit, grabbed a cup of tea or coffee, and ready to listen to the next presentation. So over to you, Mansa.
Thank you, Alexander. So yeah, hello everyone. Good afternoon. It's an absolute pleasure to be a part of this M25 spring meeting. And before I begin, let me thank the whole team for giving me this opportunity to share my piece of work. And as you can see on my first slide, there's a question which says, is this one small step for an educator or one giant leap for education? So Neil Armstrong once said, that's one small step for man and one giant leap for mankind while he landed on the moon. So while we were working on this Microsoft Teams webinar tool, I had this question that whether when we are integrating new tools in higher education, are we just taking small steps or are we taking giant leaps? So myself, I'm Mansa. I'm a learning technology developer from London South Bank University, and I work for the team CRED, which is the Center for Research Informed Teaching. So the overview of my presentation is, I'll give you a background of this project idea, what is Microsoft Teams webinar, and why we are using webinar tool, and our journey so far, the challenges we encountered, and the future scope. So to give you a background, to begin with, I'd say at LSBU, we offer a wide range of training programs every semester. So these training programs, these are added manually as Teams meeting, and we circulate that with the help of the communication teams. So these training programs, I would say precisely this includes less than 60 programs every semester, which includes the learns and learns, the big and small training sessions that we do. With the Teams meetings, it has its own limitations that we noticed later, and we thought of improving that. So over to the limitations, this included manual creation of Teams meetings. So you're supposed to create it manually for each of the 60 or 50 training programs or the learns and learns, the events we deliver. We are supposed to go one by one, adding the title, the time, the description, adding the organizer and the co-organizer. So this takes a lot of manual effort. And tracking the attendance was another hurdle we were facing. And it was when it comes to attendance, we wanted to compare between actually the number of people who booked for the session and people who are actually showing up for the session. So in order to make this comparison, the Teams meeting was not providing with the requirement we wanted. And there was no option of having a registration link rather than the joining link, which we circulate with the help of the communications team. And we did receive a couple of emails from staff who did mention that they can't find the joining links, and that this did have a minor impact with the attendance of the staff who were showing up for the training programs. And also, not only that, there were no reminders apart from the prior reminder that we get with the pop-up that says 15 minutes, after 15 minutes, your Teams meeting is going to be started. So in order to overcome all these limitations, we came up with a new template, the relatively new template that Microsoft Teams was providing, which was the webinar. And we saw potentially a huge potential in this tool for organizing, for managing meetings, for training sessions and events. If we see what made this webinar tool unique for us. First and foremost, it was the registration form. So this could give us a registration page with custom fields. And we could find that it has a wider capacity compared to the Teams meeting. By default, it comes with polls and Q&A. So we have this interactive polls and the structured Q&A as well. With the analytics and reporting, we had this registration link as well as this attendee list, so we could make a proper comparison. It also did send automatic notifications, not as a Teams meeting, but it did send an event reminder 1 hour prior to that, and also while you have once registered. We made a precise comparison between the Microsoft Teams and the webinar. So we were focused particularly on these key features, which was the capacity, the professional experience, the analytics and reporting, and even specific features. Of which there were the one of them was the green room availability, where the people who are actually doing the presentation, they could prepare themselves and make sure that the slides as well as the presenter is ready. So, and luckily, surprisingly, this session, which we are actually watching this moment live, this is a webinar. So this has been created using the webinar template, and thanks to the whole team. What we aim to accomplish. Our aim was, and it is still, that we want to have a proper enhanced tracking. We want to scale it to a larger number of audience. We want to ensure that it reduces the human manual errors, and that could mean having the days and time, maybe even while adding the organizer or co-organizer. Also, not just create a webinar template replacing the Teams meeting, but we also wanted to automate the process to ensure we are reducing the manual effort and we can have more time spent on different ideas. How do we create a webinar? So this is the webinar template that once you click on this, the drop down, the area where you're creating the new Teams meeting, you have another template which have been recently added, which is the webinar, where you're supposed to add the title, the start date, the description, and you can see the organizer name. And also we have this co-organizer feature where you can add the co-organizer. I'm sure you must have noticed on the left-hand side, we do have set of other settings which give you this option of having the attendee status, emails, the reports, and the connect apps. Once you have created this webinar, what can you do with that link? So once you have the webinar created, you can circulate that link as the registration link. And once you have got that registration link, as and once you click on that, you're taken to the first page on the left-hand side. So once you click on the register button, you are taken into a page where you're supposed to give the registration information, which includes your name and your email address. And after that registration, you receive a webinar notification. So you receive a webinar notification that says your spot is being reserved for this event. Not just that, this also ensures you have this particular time slot being recorded or added onto your Teams calendar. You also have, you can see on this right-hand side, small webinar of which I tried. So you can see this gets automatically added. So even if you miss that, this ensures we have this added on your Teams calendar. What is the journey so far? So far, we have identified the need. So what was a need? We wanted to replace the contemporary Teams meeting with the webinar template, which the Microsoft Teams provide. Not only that, but we also wanted to automate the creation of those webinars. So how can we automate this process of creation of those webinars on Microsoft Teams? So we started exploring the options available, and that's how we landed on the Microsoft Graph API via the Graph Explorer. So this allows this platform allows you to play around the API methods, and I can say that we did face quite a bit of challenges, so which included persistent errors. So I was getting this was a bad request and we can't go further. And I was hitting a wall every time, then and now. And then we started researching the alternatives available. Exploring most of the Microsoft documentation was a huge Herculean task. But yes, we found one online Microsoft documentation, which did mention that the method that we are trying to use is not added on this Microsoft Graph Explorer, and we are supposed to try with a different platform. And they did point us to the Postman, which is an API testing tool. So we replicated all the work we have worked on this Graph Explorer, and we just replicated the same work on Postman. And boom, it was magic. We successfully automated the creation of webinar by passing all the limitations faced with Graph Explorer. So is that all we have? Are we is that the testing that we have done? No. So the journey so far is that even though Postman did help us for the automation of webinar creation, we did have a pebble and the shoe, and that was the authentication of access token. So for every user, for every time you are creating a new webinar, you're supposed to have a new access token. So we need to overcome that at the moment. And also this comes along with a lot of admin access permissions. So you are supposed to go through a huge list of API permissions, does read, write, virtual meeting creations. So a huge lot of permissions that you require. We have come up with a solution design diagram. So this is it. So you can see with the Postman, we used the Microsoft Graph Explorer, that API, and that is how we automatically created the webinars now. So we are looking forward to create an application. So long story short, I will say we have a platform, Microsoft Access platform, where we have enough data of all the training programs stored, along with the name of the staff and their employee IDs being stored. So we are looking forward to create an application that pulls data from the Microsoft Access. So it pulls all the authentication data. So we are not anymore going to fiddle with the authentication access token issue. And thus, we are looking forward to use the same API and automate the process of creating webinars and expand this institutionally. So currently, we have just built that within our team. So we are looking forward to expand this further. For the future scope, we are waiting to make it available for staff and students. So schedule with the scheduling and timetabling processes. Not only that, we are looking forward for the hybrid teaching environments and integrating the different applications. For example, Panopto application to be included on this webinar tool. By this, I come to the end of my presentation. Let me quickly check the chat.
Thanks, Manta. That's really useful. Yeah, there's some questions in the chat. Maybe I'll just pick one or two, and then if you want to come back to them later. But yeah, thanks colleagues for showing your appreciation. So I guess the first question from Honora: would you replace all the teaching webinars, seminars with Teams webinar as opposed to Teams meetings? If you had the choice, would you make that move?
Absolutely, I would say yes. So with the Teams meeting, we don't have this opportunity to make ourselves ready with the slides, with the professional way it does. With the classrooms, we want the attendance as well. So it's not just that we are sending them the links. We want to be sure that students are attending. So we would really recommend using webinars if we are given a choice of choosing between Teams meeting and webinar.
Excellent. And I guess kind of aligned to that, are there any limitations for attendees in the participation side? Obviously, at the moment, everybody's camera off and mic off. Have you experienced any of those limitations or any workarounds?
No, at the moment, no. So this was tested within our team, a team of 5 and 6. So this is a very small, very precise one at the moment. But as I have tested, I can say there are no limitations for attendees' participation at the moment.
That's really useful. Thank you. Do you know, just as a side question, do webinars work in channels of team meetings? Have you ever tried that?
No, to be honest, no, I haven't tried on the channels. So yeah, but yes, I can definitely test that with this automation. So I can include that as one of the elements that I'm looking forward to test.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Mansa. I think we're probably at time now. So yeah, colleagues, if you can show your appreciation by the reactions, that would be much appreciated. And Alex, shall we head swiftly on?
We shall indeed. Thank you so much for that, man. So there's a lot of kind of like really interesting information in that, and I appreciate you taking the time to share that with us. Moving on to our final presentation today, I'm very pleased to welcome my wonderful colleague, Anora A. DeSuze, and she's going to be sharing with us some pros and cons to customizing your VLE look and feel for online learning. Over to you, Anora.
Thanks very much. I wonder if everyone will be as happy to see me by the end of this. Now you may notice this session is quite long, but trust me, we're gonna go on a journey together. Can I just get a quick thumbs up if you can see my screen? Because obviously it helpfully says you're sharing your screen right now, which doesn't really help me. Oh, cool. So we're good. Okay, so let's go. Customizing VLE look and feel for online learning, a tale of two approaches and some lessons learned. So we're going to try and make this slightly interactive, but as ever, in an academic context, we have to start off with some context and some definitions. And d'où parles-tu, camarade? Where do you speak from? So just to tell you why I want to tell you all of these things and get your perspective. So I've worked at UCL, I've worked at City St George's now, or City University of London as it was, and now I work at KCL. And in all these cases, I've been looking at fully online learning and thinking about how we can make that work best, obviously within some limitations. And the work that I'm going to be presenting today is, if I'm completely honest, very much not my own. It is the work of many, many colleagues. And I'm aware also that I don't work at City anymore, so take that with a pinch of salt on that. But I'm presenting my thoughts on that, and as we can see from that, views my own. Very important, as we all learn on Twitter. Bit more definition, online learning. So for the purposes of this, there are many, many things we could define it as, but I'm going to say courses with fully online or with majority of online delivery. So at King's, that looks like the fully online MSCs are on the institutional kind of core Moodle. We have CPD, some of which sits on the institutional core Moodle, edX, etc. But we also have MOOCs, and they sit on FutureLearn, or at least most of them, as far as I know. Now, because I know that this is a long session and could be an incredibly dry topic, I'm going to invite you next to actually tell me, where are your fully online modules hosted? So if you're able to go to menti.com and enter the code 53240052, or indeed, hopefully, click the link in there. And then, hopefully, everyone is there. And you can answer the lovely question. Aha, there we are. Where are your fully online modules hosted? That was the question that I actually wanted to have. So hopefully everyone can answer that. So an external provider, somewhere else, into core VLE. So we've got quite a few core VLEs. Yes, oh, okay, strong core VLE game. This is going to be good for my presentation, but also we will see. Give it a couple more seconds because we've got quite a few people on here. Couple more seconds. Yes. Okay, we've got about 30 people who've answered. 31. Carrying on. I'll leave it on there. But I think nevertheless that shows us that there's still quite a lot of appetite for the core VLE. I'll leave that open for now. So why would you do it to yourself? Why would you host an institutional VLE when, as we know, there's quite a lot of limitations to it? And maybe some of you have SITs, and that's fun in terms of using other core systems and all the rest of it. But there are some real benefits. One of them is integration with university core systems. Much as we maybe don't like them, student records and all the rest of it, the account creation, the library access, all of that is really valuable. it also, and I think this bit is really important to me, is that they are fully part of the student body. The students that we have maybe halfway across the world are still part of the student body and have to be borne in mind. It's also possible, hopefully, to reuse some of the content that you've developed in hopefully a far more structured and kind of careful way, and actually be able to reuse that between face-to-face courses and other things. You can also have potential fluidity between delivery modes, and that's a fancy way of saying maybe actually you want some people to be able to take a fully online module within a face-to-face program and actually still be able to have a similar experience. And then the last one is a hopeful thing, taking on Alex's thing, which is change by osmosis. So if we're making the platform better for fully online learners, hopefully we're making it better for all users of that. That's the hope. What is the challenge? The challenge, well, I'm going to present two kind of different cases. The first one is at City, working within Bayes Business School, and then the second one is in KCL, working in King's Digital. So this is just a brief snapshot. As you can see, I've taken it literally from one of the training videos from lovely City colleagues. This is City Moodle in July 2023. But to be honest, it looks at least very familiar to me, very similar. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not a bad VLE. I'm not saying it's horrible VLE, but maybe it isn't tailored necessarily for online learning and might not have been meeting the expectations of the global MBA students at Bayes who are paying quite a premium price. And again, this is managed for all staff and students. So we have to talk about sustainability and all the rest of it by the lead learning enhancement and development team. So there was limited agency working within a particular department or school to be able to change it. Here, at King's, we have Keats, which is also a Moodle. You'll notice that I quite like Moodle, but I think some of these principles are applicable across VLEs. So this is the look and feel that in a way inspired the customization that we then moved on for. So this was the look and feel from 2019 to 2023. This is 311. It now looks completely different, much better, but this is kind of the initial opening proposition that stirred the department to action. So we needed to make this feel like a modern, engaging experience tailored for online learning. Again, not managed by us, and for good reason, and providing lots of other things to lots of other people. So it's limited agency and great care. So I'm now going to ask you another question. What are the potential challenges / risks of making customizations within a VLE, a core VLE, just for a subset of users? What potential hypothetical risks do you think could occur within that? So if you go back to this, have a think. Yes, yeah, completely agree with that. Anything else that you can think of? Yes, also that. Yes, also that. And yes, envy was a big problem actually. No joke on some of them. Support is coming up quite a lot. Upgrades are coming up quite a lot. Long-term support, stability, cost, training. Yes, all of these are extremely, extremely familiar. Oh, and then we've got a few more coming in. Not enrolled into the likes of SITs, confusion for staff. Oh, I wonder who put this one in with Hacky.js. Exactly. So changes to functionality. How you're actually doing that is a big question. Few people like change, apart from the people in this group. So we're getting a few kind of common themes, right, which are around upgrades, long-term support, kind of difficulty of kind of coherence of experience. And then, apologies, I'm moving back to here. So here are some of the risks and challenges that I had, one of which was basically accurately defining the use case, the needs for different sets of users in the same VLE. It's actually a big issue to try and make sure that what we're changing is actually going to be useful and that we understand who this is meant to be actually affecting. Bearing in mind staff and support needs. So it's not just the students who might need support, it's also staff, especially if they're building in it, and not bleeping up a core business platform, which is the main business of the university. And you also have to do this with limited agency, limited control, and probably limited resource, and also doing so sustainably. So in terms of upgrades, what if something's deprecated and how much do actually people have to input each time? So I'm going to look at two responses from the two places that I've worked at. Again, I didn't do the bulk of the work, but I was deeply involved in them, and they live within me now, and I choose to share this with you. So one is Bayes Business School, where the theme, basically a new theme, was created in 2016, and I think it continues. And one of them is King's Digital, where a kind of customized version was created in 2019 and still continues. So I'll start with the first kind of approach first, which is Bayes. So this was a new theme designed by Leonard, who I think might even be on this call. So any questions hopefully can be answered properly by him. But this was actually designed for online learning. It was called Revolutionary. And actually, I think it kind of was, like it was doing something very different, as you'll see people really reacted very positively to it. So it was a child theme, a fork from Snap, which was completely different to the theme that was on the main kind of core area of the VLE. So it was designed lovingly and in every single detail by Leonard, and then implemented by an independent contractor without any central support. And the theme was activated at a user whilst at a course level using the settings. Everyone really loved it. The envy was real. I think the biggest compliment that anyone could pay it was that it doesn't look like Moodle, which I think, as you know, is quite something. So it had a really big focus on streamlined navigation, on a clear learning sequence, literally stepped. It highlighted progress using both colors and numerical values, as you can see up in the menu on the side. And it focused on interaction, actually giving students an idea of how long they expect to spend on the content, what kind of activity, whether people had posted, etc. So it was pretty awesome. But again, I ask you, what potential issues can you see with this approach? So if we move back to here, what potential risks or issues can you see with a separate or unsupported theme? Any thoughts? And for those of you who were actually there, if you want to cheat and add the real responses, then that is also totally fair. So yes, content has to be designed to match the format. I think that will come up later. So I think that's pretty on the nose. Yes, also that. It is indeed unsupported. Yes, seeing word support is coming up quite a lot. Maintenance, yep. People leave and take the knowledge with them, yep. Constantly updating the theme code if you're able to, because there's quite a lot of expertise. Yes, they do want it sections, but they're not allowed. 2 sets of guidance and the cost for the update. Yes. There are many more. We could probably keep going. Yeah, double testing. That wasn't fun. Staff working across both. All of these are very, very triggering in the best possible way. So it was indeed very challenging to maintain. So there were kind of some inconsistencies for multiple delivery modes without flexible, fluid, I think, delivery modes. So some of the MBA students from the full-time MBA were coming onto the global MBA and then were going like, oh, what's this? Where's my stuff? They did like it, but it took them a little while to get used to it. One of the big things that we were keen on was the reusability of content, which was really important. But when we were transferring back into like standard City Moodle, as someone mentioned, there was a little bit of fiddling to actually try to get it to look right. There was no central support for students or staff. Our lovely lead colleagues help a lot of people, but this was probably adding a little bit too much to the source to actually make it usable and be able to give feedback on something that you hadn't seen before. The Snap base theme wasn't maintained regularly ultimately, so this is one of the joys and the pains of the open source community. As you can imagine, the contractor tendering for the upgrades was really costly because we didn't have anyone in-house, not to mention the actual procurement process. And we were reliant basically on very kind central colleagues to actually implement the changes. So if we wanted to change anything in the theme, we had to go all the way back to lovely lead and IT colleagues and go like, hey, would you be willing to, could you, can we have it on here? Can we test it? So it was quite a long process. And there were a couple of times where maybe its interactions with the core platform following updates left everyone at a disadvantage, and I'll leave it that way. So those, let alone us, those were not fun. So the dread that normally comes with upgrades was, I think, multiplied. was pretty cool looking though. So now a completely different approach, King's Digital. So for us here, we've done something different. So we sideload the customization and components. So it first kicked off in 2019. It's designed, developed, and maintained in the department by our UX and dev team. It's externally hosted for easy implementation and updatability, which is what I call the side loading of it. And it's activated in individual courses or activities. And other people beyond the immediate team and the immediate modules that the team builds actually use it as well. So just to maybe explain how that works with a colorful diagram, you have, as you know, like a core Moodle, plugins that have been chosen generally by CTEL or the TEL community at King's. And then you have the King's theme, which is managed by CTEL, although we have had some input into that. And that's generally affects the entirety of the platform. And then tiny sliver right at the end, you have the design system that comes in kind of layers on top. Maybe I should have done a better diagram where it would have been the icing, but you get the idea. So the design system still is kind of a slightly different approach. It allows us to add additional styling to courses. So in the past, we've added colors, we've changed the spacing, we've changed some of the typography. We added some better print styling at the time when that wasn't so good within Moodle. So students, especially distance students, would be able to print transcripts and various other notes and be able to take them away. Change some of the icons. We occasionally change the layout of some of the pages of the activities. And we also customize the video and audio player, partly so that it did important things like show the time, like the original time, how long the video is before you start playing it, but also so that there were better players for language learning, where you actually had to kind of have it autoplay and you can go back and forth and various things like that. It also adds components for content creation. These are little widgets which allow you to format text in different ways. You'll see why these are useful later. And it also allows us to add kind of a little bit of meta information on the course page. So it shows a media or a group or an assessed label for activities that are on there. So the pros got extra components for content development, which have allowed us to focus on developing within a single platform. So without extra authoring tools, adapt, rise, etc. We're not dependent on CTEL central team for updates, so we can make changes to the code whenever we like. Although to be very clear, we want to talk to our CTEL colleagues because A, we want them to be aware, we want to share that, but also because we need to be aware of what they're doing. So to be clear, this is not isolationist. It's just at least we have some control over this domain. Can be added to any course by anyone with editing access, and it embeds best practice because it also has templates and documentation. It's not just a theme. The styling information is actually drawn from one place, so we can update the code in one place, and this ish cascades all the way out. And equally, the component styling looks the same on any course where the design system is active, so there is some consistency in there. Ish. Obviously, it depends what users do. Now, as you may have realized from the format of this presentation, normally I show you the good stuff, and then we move on to the intriguing questions. So my next question is just for the lols. How do you think that you activate the design system on a page? Where do you think that actually is located? So A, B, C, where do you think that might possibly be located? Just put a dot on there. Any other place. So you could either have it in the course settings, like along that bar, maybe in a separate section, just like that, which is highlighted by C, or in a random text block on the side, like just for the lols, again, in amongst other things. So what we've got a couple more responses, kind of split. We're thinking, which would make sense, right, in the course settings along the top. Yep. I have a feeling that maybe there are some King's Digital people here, so it's a little bit of a cheat, but still. Gonna give it one more second. Let's see. I think that our King's Digital colleagues are skewing this. But you can see there's quite a lot of expectations that you might have. It should be along here. But no, it's randomly in this side block. Yes. That's an interesting choice. So yeah, this is what I mean by the slide loading. So the design system is actually activated in the course by adding a whole bunch of hidden script code in the side block. So this calls in all the files from the design system and executes some changes after the page has loaded. So the middle page loads, and then it goes, oh wait, I need to grab this, goes off, grabs it, and then reapplies it. So the design system itself is written in JavaScript and CSS, nothing particularly wildly complicated. That's just worth noting, maybe for later. So maybe by now you might have some idea of the cons. As someone mentioned earlier, it feels a bit maybe hacky to be adding code into a side block that's hidden and maybe isn't open to everyone. The code has to be added to every course manually and then updated manually if there's any changes to how that kind of design system initial script is activated. Requires a lot of manual HTML from editors. Obviously, the components seek to make that easier, but it's still, you have to be in there and you have to be poking things. It depends on JavaScript working in a browser, and it's the last thing to load. So sometimes it loads quite slowly. In the past, at least, we have found some ways to actually tackle that. And users may see a flash of unstyled content, or AUK, I guess that's how you pronounce it. And also, as we've seen, like if you think of the icing is good maybe to cover over some of the gaps in the cake, but you can't build a cake out of icing. At least I guess you could, but it would probably be quite horrible and actually wouldn't be very cake-like. So it only acts on the surface. You can't change much. And it's impacted by any changes to underlying Moodle architecture or design, which again goes back to our upgrade issues. It's also not compatible with the Moodle app or indeed any other Moodles because you'd have to load it onto your own Moodle in order to actually have it there, or at least it wouldn't know what to do if you had a different theme. So again, pros and cons. So what now? So I think it's interesting to think about what changed in a way, why we first started with the design system and what's changed since then. The design system was built for Moodle 3, which I hope no one minds, but from that first screenshot you saw maybe didn't look that great. Moodle 4 has been a big upgrade, like it looks much, much better. Moodle 5 is out soon. So we're now working with a system that was designed kind of almost 2 versions ago of Moodle, like 2 big versions. So it's worth thinking about. Keats looks more modern and is updated more regularly. We've got much better collaboration with our lovely CTAL colleagues. As you can see, we're running kind of system usability, scale, operations together and all the rest of it. Like, I think it at least is a much more positive from my side collaboration. And also Moodle is quite rightly tightening its security. So the ability to call in random scripts and all the rest of it doesn't quite sound like something you should be able to do. And someday we may not be able to do. And then that would be quite bad for us. So we need to think about that. And we also want to share our content more. And not everyone can use the DS on their VLE, can use the DS even just technically, because it demands quite a lot of understanding. As my team hear me say pretty much daily, stabilize and modularize. So what do I mean by stabilize? Well, it's actually to make the design system faster and more robust. So even if we still have very much kind of a similar approach, maybe we can make it so that it loads faster, it pulls the files from somewhere different. You know, it maybe has cleaner code or something similar. In a way, we'd much rather contribute to the main King's theme rather than customizing so much on top of it. Again, why not make it better for everyone if some of these things are maybe just relatively obvious and simple, small changes that we actually have both the UX expertise and the development expertise to make. We're trying to create a lot more of our materials within like central infrastructure, but actually that's also been great because CTEL have been kind enough to actually give us a little bit more agency in that and to be able to create our own players. So we're looking at actually updating the style and function of existing components rather than developing brand new ones. And we want to improve the use of the components and make it easier for users to use them so as they're more, more consistent at least. And so when I was talking about these components, that's an example that you can see on the right there, which is the timeline component. So it just allows for a bit more structuring rather than just like, header, paragraph, horizontal rule just for fun. A little bit more exciting. What do I mean by modularize? Making the design system into a plugin. this is how actually changes, customization, and functionality are normally managed in Moodle. So why not follow that example? There's some really strong standards, there's some really strong examples already in the community. And with this, it could be installed and managed like any other Moodle functionality. Yes, that would mean that we're probably more dependent on our CTEL colleagues. But if it makes the upgrades, the maintenance, and the usage easier, maybe that's a trade-off that's worth taking. It would improve loading time because the page wouldn't have to load and then reload, which obviously is a bit time-consuming and can be quite weird for users. And also more functionality would be possible because we'd actually be working within the Moodle architecture instead of just trying to like add some layering on top. And it would probably also be more usable with the Moodle app for offline mobile learning. We could make it so that it's that, and that actually would be a massive asset in terms of improving the experience for our users. So it's been a whistle-stop tour. Titled this Lessons Learned, but maybe Closing Thoughts sounds more positive and more aspirational. So overall, as you might have guessed, as ever, it's a balance. I do feel quite strongly, in a strange way, that hosting in core platforms is a really beneficial thing. It's very, very tempting when the whole thing doesn't work how you want it to just go, oh God, I wish we could just switch to insert name of platform that is not Blackboard. But actually, there's a lot of benefits to it, and there's almost a lot of, I'd say, ideological kind of benefits and an importance for students, our fully online students, to be in that platform. But the big thing is, honestly, and I think I saw a comment earlier, which is, it doesn't really matter what VLE you have, and in some ways, you're probably not entirely wrong. The most important thing actually is consistency. Just make it easy for people to learn. If you're going to be rubbish, at least be consistent. Maybe you could be excellent and consistent. But the consistency is really important to users, probably way more, I would say, than the customization. It can be really useful to actually be able to kind of have a hacky approach and be able to make quick changes to see how things would look like, to test them out. But if you're hoping to be around for a long time and to have a lot of users, then maybe scalability actually is a bit of a question. You also want to customize on a solid base. So, is the project going to be, is the thing you're basing your work on, going to be an outdated technology? Who's it owned by? I think we've seen some platforms that maybe, like Alex said earlier, that we thought were going to last forever and were going to be very stable. All it takes is, maybe a change in direction by the company, maybe someone moves on, all the rest of it, and suddenly, actually, what you thought was a stable base is actually something that now is very, very heavy for you to support. And then customization has to be aligned with your long-term strategic institution objectives. So, frankly, if you're only going to do like 3 fully online courses, maybe don't bother. This is a lot of work and effort, and you'd probably be better off spending your time looking at the consistency aspect. Counterpoint, though, is actually if you want to think about expanding your learning and expanding your fully online offering, then maybe actually having a pedagogy reflected actually in your customized theme is totally worthwhile and actually leads to a great experience that wouldn't be the same. But also equally, maybe if in due course your organization is going to think about that kind of fluid delivery model where students can take one module that's online and one module that's not, you need to think about that. How far are you going to stray from the core? And then lastly, obviously, collaboration between departmental and central teams does actually benefit everyone. I understand I've been on kind of both sides of that perspective, having been extremely centrally embedded and having also been out in department. And it can be hard because sometimes in a way you feel like you're working across purposes. But I really do think that it benefits everyone. I think one of the things that we can do when we're looking at fully online learning is look at a far narrower use case initially and try things out there and really try and push some of that practice and then share that back with central colleagues and for them to go, okay, well, most of it doesn't apply, but actually this bit is quite interesting. And equally, having a good idea about what their objectives are for the future means that we can actually hopefully align with that and build towards it. So some thoughts, but a lot of love for CTEL colleagues. So I got through that way faster than I thought I would, but I've seen a lot of discussion in the chat. So I'm going to invite you maybe to do one of two things. The first one is to maybe ask any questions that you have. And then the second one is just to think about what you would most like to see. I don't know why this, but yes, to see what customization you'd most like to make for online learning in the future. But I'll stop sharing for now so that we can focus on the questions. But please keep putting your responses in there.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Anora. That was fantastic. I'm just looking through kind of like some of the questions.
So I think one question I saw come in the chat as it was going on was, how do you balance customization with accessibility? I think was one of the questions that got quite a few likes.
No, an excellent question. And I think one of the things that we're very lucky on is that the entirety of the King's Digital team is like stoked about accessibility, and like in a way that I've rarely seen. The the amount of times in the best possible way that I've been brought up, or it's been suggested to me that I might want to put proper alt text on that image, is quite substantial. So it's a big passion aspect. I think what's great on that in a way is that it means that from the get-go, in the nicest possible way, there's nowhere to hide with our customization. So because every one of our users and a lot of our team are so dedicated to accessibility, everything that we do is, even in fact, some of the customization that we have on the components includes extra ARIA labels to actually make it clear to users who are using a screen reader what this is going to be. We're hoping that maybe even through some of the components we can add better accessibility through this. So I mean, it's a bit of a lame-o answer, but to a certain extent, it's just to have accessibility at the core as you're developing it. Like the idea is to make things better for fully online users, and normally I think we know that doing good accessibility is better for all users of the platform. So that sounds like a politician's answer, but I do actually really mean it. Yeah,
I would agree with you completely. It's I agree. A question that's just come in from Dan O'Meara, who is a King's colleague. What would be your ideal process for suggesting, approving, sending out design changes to the wider college?
interesting. I think personally, and this is one of the great luxuries of being in a departmental team, right? Which is that to a certain extent, I think we can afford to put these changes out there, and hopefully, as long as CTEL colleagues think that they aren't nuts, for them to actually be available for people to pick up. We don't necessarily, apart from the courses that we actually build closely, we don't have to force people to bring that together. So we'd rather put that out to the community. But to pick up on what Dan might be alluding to, is that actually we're very lucky that we have a UX team, and that UX team spends a lot of time doing research with students, looking at student data, and trying to understand where the problem actually is, and then being able to actually prototype that, test it, and then actually have it be really validated that the solutions we're proposing are not just the ones that we think look good, or I prefer, say for instance, I really like having kind of a dark mode theme on here. Maybe I like it that way, but I know other colleagues really hate it. So I'd much rather have the evidence as to how many users want that kind of mode. Does it mean that it's for everyone or something? So I think a lot of it is actually based on data and kind of persuasion, or in the sense of at least showing people what's available and then asking them how they might use it and seeing if that's actually a useful use case or not, and if that's something that we need to bear in mind. Hopefully that answers some of Dan's question.
I appreciate that. And now one in from James Marsh, who used to be at King's. Do you think making it available broadly risks creating consistency issues outside of your department, depending on adoption? And if so, how do you mitigate against this?
And that's a very fair question. I think to a certain extent, one of the interesting things is because this is customization rather than like a full theme to a certain extent. In a way, the elements themselves can be used in a variety of ways. So in a way, that's a good thing, right? Because it's open to anyone to use. But I can also see that people might choose to, I don't know, have like a timeline component on the main page. You're like, oh Lord, no, what have you done? So I think part of that is also about providing a lot of templates and a lot of examples of what best practice looks like. And in a way, there's an interesting kind of chicken and egg thing here, which is that if we're able to share what scenarios and what kind of templated approaches we're actually designing these things for and how we think they should be used, actually that's probably better because people are like, oh, that's how you use it, like it should go here. And that's, yes, it probably should go here and not on the main page. And as we know, users are very creative. You didn't think they could put it there, but they have, and you're like, wow, that's super, yeah, that's the thing. And I think that there is something on that that's quite interesting in a way about how much generally we want to lock down the VLE. And this is a big debate generally. Maybe that could be my next talk. I don't know. About like how much you want to lock down the VLE because it might make things more consistent. But also, I think as educational technologists, we want our users, both staff and students, to feel welcome and have agency in the platform. And so locking it down to the nth degree, I like personally also, otherwise then you have to do lots of stuff for them. And I'd much rather they did it for so many different reasons. So it's kind of a bit of a chicken and egg thing, but I think mainly it's about giving good examples of good practice and giving them the idea of what it could look like rather than them just copy and pasting some stuff and kind of going, oh, I guess it looks okay there. Hopefully, again, that makes sense.
That really does. And I think a phrase we're using more and more at King's is kind of flexibility within the framework. Kavya, you can do it. You can do an awful lot, but we need some barriers around it to help and facilitate that.
Guardrails. Yeah.
And then another question that's just come in: was there any user research to set up the current system?
So there was a lot of research that was done by the UX team before I arrived, like full disclosure, that was done especially around like what students struggled with, or which bits they highlighted as being kind of really problematic or detrimental to their experience. I think there are kind of two parts to that user research. Sometimes it comes up, say, in general surveys or like in a general interview. And I think the UX team, especially shout out to Rachel, did something like 70 interviews with students, which is a lot of interviews. And out of some of those emerge broad themes, and those broad themes, those pain points, give us the idea where we should be looking more closely, and then that's something where we do further research. So we have that as kind of broad themes, and then looking at it in more detail, there's a lot of user research, say when we get to the assignment, which is a delightful experience to submit, which is actually doing kind of talk aloud testing and watching users as they actually try to go through it and going like, oh, okay, this screen doesn't really make sense. What do we do with this? How do we approach that? So there's kind of, yes, basically is the answer. There was user research to set up the current system. And also there is ongoing research, but there's kind of two aspects. One is more of a generative aspect and kind of one is a focused and kind of evaluative and testing approach.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I think we've come to the end of our questions. So colleagues, if you can thank Honora, that would be very much appreciated. Will I hand back to you for the close, Alex?
Yeah, indeed. I think we've got a hand raised, or is that an accidental hand?
I don't see one my side.
Must have come back down. That's fine. I was Marta. It was an accident, no problem at all. I'd just like to thank all the presenters today for sharing some fantastic work that's been going on across their individual institutions and highlighting some keen practice that's going on and actually kind of sharing lots of different ways that we can use our technologies. And in particular, for myself and Sue, it was been great to kind of get that little bit of a deep dive into the Teams webinar platform. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to say to you, and I'm going to do that cheesy thing where I say, we're giving you back some time. You know, it's yours to kind of do whatever you want to do with it. But before you do rush off and do that, we just wanted to remind you that there is a summer M25 meeting, and the date and location is the Thursday, the 17th of July at Senate House. This is face to face, and it will be in conjunction with our wonderful colleagues at Muggle. The emerging themes so far are international students. So if you have any kind of like presentations within your department or kind of like colleagues across your institution that want to kind of like come along and present on that theme, then please do get in touch with either myself or Sue or anyone kind of like on the committee. And we'd be very pleased to hear your presentations. Thank you so much once again for your participation and your contributions via the chat and the reactions. It's been great. Take care. Have a lovely afternoon.
Thanks all. Appreciate it. We'll start the recording now.